Joining us now in the studio is Marian Binder, the director of the University of Arizona's Counseling and Psychological Services. Thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
This is the point where now 3-4 days out from the shooting, people are beginning to deal with this. Shock may be wearing off for victims, families, friends, even the community. Mm-hmm. Let's start with victims. What are some of the things that they're beginning to go through?
Well, you know, victims, again, are at several levels. We've got the victims with injuries, and at this point, for those folks, medical attention, making sure that they're going to be able to be medically stabilized, trying to determine what the nature of their ongoing impairments could be, if any, at that most severe level. That's obviously where we're at. You know, certainly with Congresswoman Giffords, we are at the level of wanting to know physical safety and security. For people who have possibly had lesser injuries or been victims in the sense that they were present but not necessarily shot or injured in that kind of a sense, you have people that are going to be dealing with many levels of just the disbelief at what they witnessed, at what happened, at perhaps some sense that it could have been them that was shot and wasn't. For some people that will be a relief. For some people there will be guilt associated with that. For some people there will be anxiety about how close a call it was.
Let's talk about some of those, as you just identified, victims. We've only talked about the 20 people who were shot.
Right.
But it was a Saturday morning at a grocery store. There were plenty of people around, be it staff members of the Congresswoman's who were not injured physically, or people standing in line to buy milk or to talk with the Congresswoman, or to go to one of the other. They're victims as much in this as anybody else.
That's correct, because a victim doesn't have to be a person who sustains an actual physical injury. A victim can be anybody who's impacted by the events that they are part of. And in an event like this, especially an event which takes place at the grocery store on a Saturday morning, it's not a setting where you would expect an act of violence to occur. So it's even more out of sync with people's expectations, and so, to be a victim of something like this when you're in a dangerous situation, still that's difficult, but to be victimized by witnessing or being party to something like this when you're in a situation that you've deemed as totally safe, as totally routine, it has another level of impact on people.
We hear the phrase often in situations of violence where people are killed. We hear the phrase survivor's guilt. Mm-hmm. What is survivor's guilt? And I imagine there would be plenty of it to go around at this one.
Right. Survivor's guilt generally has to do with the idea that someone may feel that they were spared and another person was not. And they may either feel simply that that wasn't fair, or that they feel guilt about that, or that they didn't deserve to be spared in a more extreme case. And so a lot of times people will feel, why that person and not me? And that especially can relate to people who might be close relatives or partners, parents of people who were more seriously wounded. So, somebody may die and their partner may say, I wish it had been me and not them. Why was I spared and not them? And so it can have many levels and many different thoughts that go along with it, but it's basically that concept, that I was the one that was spared and the other person wasn't.
As we move out from this, people may think, I'm fine. It's been a few days now. Mm-hmm. Everything's great. I had my one big moment and my one big cry. I'm fine. Is that correct?
Not at all, and that's a really good point that you make. When people respond to traumatic events, first of all, there's tremendous amount of individual variability. But for many people, those first stages right after a trauma occurs, there's a lot of shock, there's a lot of disbelief, there's a lot of just attempting to find out the details, find out what happened. Everybody's talking about it. On some levels, there's a lot of support around. Many people who don't like to admit that things impact them in a problematic way are going to kind of bat down the hatches emotionally, so to speak, and kind of feel like in those days, okay, they're they're okay. Other people, as you described, might have a big cry, a big moment of a breakdown, something that feels or looks to other people like, oh, this person is really distressed. But that can be misleading because it's sometimes not until days or even weeks or sometimes longer go by that the impact of the trauma on any given individual might show itself. And it might not be simply about what they witnessed, but it might be about thoughts they have about what they witnessed, fears they have related to that. It might be about something that gets triggered about past issues that they've experienced or worried about, or future fears that they have now about, what danger could they be in the future that they don't know about. So many times these things unfold over a period of time, and the initial reaction isn't always the peak.
As you have said, everybody is different, but for all of us out there who are in the community, we've seen people just in the community reacting very strongly emotionally to this, let alone the victims, both physical and not. Those of us who are out there, are there signs we need to watch for in ourselves or in coworkers, family, friends?
Well, I'll tell you first that there are some signs that are very typical of reaction to trauma. And that doesn't mean that everybody has these reactions. When I say they're typical, what I mean is that it's normal for people to exhibit that. And so the first thing people need to know is if they're feeling anxiety, if they're feeling somewhat irritable, if their moods are sort of going up, going down, if their thoughts are a little bit disorganized, or they're finding themselves being a little bit forgetful. Maybe they're feeling down, or they're feeling they could be feeling clingy, like they don't want to be alone, or they could be feeling just the opposite, like they don't want to deal with seeing anybody else and they are withdrawing more. The point being that anything that's really different from that person's normative way of being could be a sign that they're reacting. The things I mentioned, anxiety, mood issues, irritability, tearfulness, withdrawal, those are things that we tend to look for. Other things that people sometimes exhibit are an increase in substance use, or sleep, or something that tries to serve as an avoidance to help them get away from the feelings or away from any painful images or thoughts that they may have related to this. So those are some common ones. What we want to be watching out for is reactions that are highly uncharacteristic of the person and that persist, such that they're unable to return to work, they're unable to carry on a conversation after a few days. And so we're really looking for things that are pervasive and lasting in that way, in terms of problems that we then want to address further.
When should somebody seek counseling? Obviously, we have here on campus, we have you all, but not all our viewers are on campus. That's or associated with campus. So when do we know it's time to seek some counseling?
Well, in general, I think people can expect that if they've got some disruption in their mood or their feelings in the few days after an event occurs, but they're more or less able to continue their regular activities, then I think seeking counseling may not be necessary. It could still be helpful, of course, because sometimes it's just helpful to talk about your feelings and to validate that they're not odd or not problematic. But if a person is exhibiting changes either in their physical well-being, and that could be sleep, appetite, energy level, their emotional well-being, and that could have to do with edginess, anxiety, depression, their thoughts, their cognitions, and that could be worry or disrupted thinking, or their behavior. They're just not acting like themselves. They can't do the things that they are expected to do. If somebody's got a disruption in one of those areas that persists, then it's probably a good idea to seek some professional help. That's what the individual should know. For somebody looking at the individual, those are also the things that they're watching out for. And we often find that someone else is worried about an individual and trying to get them to counseling before the individual themselves decides that they ought to seek help.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate your time.
You're very welcome.